Hi guys, welcome back to Behind the Beat. Here with my dad today, and we are going to be talking about classic rock. Classic rock is a genre that started in the mid 1960s and then transformed and grew into what you guys all know about today. So, started bands were like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Queen, The Who, Pink Floyd, Fleetwood Mac, Billy Joel, Aerosmith, Bruce Springsteen, and Elton John, and so many more that I can't even
It's
list.
quite the
But
variety there. Yep.
exactly, it is just kind of a huge category of music, and there's multiple million subgenres of just rock. So we're
Yeah,
gonna.
we've talked about that before. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is rock and roll? I think there's a lot of things that you could classify as classic rock,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, started in the '60s. I think that's kind of where the bands that we associate with classic rock started. But I don't think the term was ever really associated with classic rock. I don't know when that came out.
No,
I'm
yeah,
guessing probably more like the '80s or late
recently,
'70s,
yeah.
because at that point rock and roll had been around for 2 or 3 decades. So they kind of I think they used the term classic rock to identify the kind of the more foundational
Pioneers.
bands that had endured,
Mm-hmm.
that were still producing, that were around for a while, that were not just kind of flash in the pan current popular rock of the day. It's more just the enduring classical rock.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna just like talk about a couple topics, and I'm gonna ask him some questions, and we're just gonna talk about a lot of things. So buckle in. All right. What makes classic rock timeless, and like, what is classic rock? Let's start with that
Okay,
one.
what
What
is
is
classic?
classic rock?
Well, I think everybody has their own definition. So I would define what classic rock to me is anything that kind of started with the Beatles and evolved down along the sounds of what we typically call pure or traditional rock and roll that endured. So hard rock could fall into classic rock. I think some of it does. Like Led Zeppelin, for example, I think is considered hard rock, but it's also classic rock.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit your more progressive rock and roll stuff from like the '70s might also fall in there, like the Rush and the Yes. And then there's also bands like the Rolling Stones that have been playing since the '60s, and Pink Floyd as well, that have not just started in the '60s but continue to produce music all the way up to the 2000s. And I think bands like that are obviously classic rock. So I think I would define it as that. And really, it comes down to the band. Like I think rock and roll. You know, there's people that have all sorts of theories about who founded rock and roll. There's the two guys that I think of when I think of like the original rock and roll is probably Chuck Berry, who is iconic for his guitar play and the way he kind of did his thing, and obviously Elvis Presley. But they were not necessarily classic rock; they were rock and roll. But I think the Beatles and the derivatives of that
Mm-hmm.
would be kind of what I could call classic rock, and I think that's more of the four-piece band. Elvis was a performer; Chuck Berry was a performer. They're amazingly talented. Chuck Berry was an amazing guitarist as well, but they come from the rhythm and blues sort of school of performing, where it's just one guy doing their thing with backup musicians. Whereas you look at the Beatles and Rolling Stones, there was a four-piece band, right? And like your shirt shows, the Beatles were the first band I would think that had like that whole band persona that really got out there.
Mm-hmm.
Other artists like that, I think they started like in the '50s. They had, there was like Buddy Holly and the Crickets that it became Buddy Holly. Then some of those bands that were really just kind of artists. I think the music industry itself promoted just one person, and I think they try to do that with other bands too. But you look at like the Stones, it's Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Who's
Right.
greater? Nobody can say that.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles, obviously, even more so, all four of those guys had their own
Solo
huge careers.
careers,
Yeah, solo careers, but also huge influence in their own sphere.
like
But
George
Lennon and
Harrison.
McCartney were the two primary
Mm-hmm.
Beatles, but it was
George
more than just
Harrison
that.
had like the
Oh yeah,
guitar
George
going for
Harrison
him.
played a lot. He had some big solo stuff even in the '80s.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I think he had more success commercially in the '80s than Paul McCartney did, who was probably the most successful of the solo acts. But anyway, yeah, that concept of a band and the sound that a band produced, I think really created what was classic rock. So that's for me, that's the delineation. It's something that
Mm-hmm.
kind of started in that era that had rock and roll influence, and it was a band. It was a band or an artist with a band. I mean, like there's you know, you mentioned Billy Joel. He and Elton John, they were the piano side of classic rock, and they were definitely kind of evolved into a certain style, but they also had huge bands with them,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't just them. David Bowie's another one who had a band, even though he was a solo guy. It was not the same as like Chuck Berry's supporting cast, or not the same
Right.
as the supporting cast you get. Like you mentioned Bruce Springsteen, I think too.
Mm-hmm.
He had the E Street Band, and he also did solo stuff. But they had bands. Tom Petty the same way. Tom Petty
Right.
and the Heartbreakers. There's the backup bands were not nearly as significant. The other guys were not at the same level as the like
They wouldn't
the
be where they
Beatles or
were.
the Rolling Stones, but they wouldn't be where we were for sure without that.
Okay, so what would you say makes classic rock timeless? I mean, I think like maybe not in the era like you're saying that like that was considered classic rock, but as you know, you go further in rock and you realize those were really the foundations and like upbringing of classic rock. You realize like that was the classic, that was the original, that was the OG. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's like, I think a lot of what makes it timeless was just the music resonated and it continued to resonate.
I love like I still listen to the Beatles
Oh yeah,
all the time.
and the Beatles like it's funny because I listened to the Beatles and I was a huge Beatles fan. In fact, my brief existence trying to pretend to be in a band with my friends was we were did Beatles cover songs and we played stuff and like I could do a few songs and play the guitar and maybe sing the John Lennon parts with my buddies and that was our band, right? And this was in the '90s, right? So well past the time that John Lennon had been killed, and well past the time that the Beatles had really been successful. Uh, I was not even alive. Born in 1977, I was not even alive when the Beatles were producing
right.
music.
Wow, that's crazy.
And but I grew up, idolizing that style and that sound, and even just consuming the media, even like some of the cool shows that they did and things. So
I feel like it speaks to all the generations because they have a lot of songs just about like a lot of different variety of things. Like they have like "Let It Be," where that one's kind of more like speaking to your mind and like being like, hey, like calming songs, like yeah.
yeah, and there's like those, every rock and roll, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, but every rock and roll band has what their message is, but it's not always the same, right?
Mhm.
Some songs are standalone. Some songs kind of represent an era or a movement. Some songs are anthems politically that still resonate. But more than anything, I think with classic rock, like some of the stuff that it's just you hear it and you're like, this is a great song, and it'll be that way. And I think there's stuff that comes out today. It's hard to really identify it because there's so much variety and there's so much that's like in this generation. I think there's a lot more like instant consumption of things.
Yeah.
So a song doesn't get its own natural traction. It's almost like
It's
instant explosion, and then all of a sudden nobody wants to hear it anymore. And there's a level of that.
Overplay it.
Right? Yeah, and but the bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Who, they had huge followings back then. They were. It's probably hard for me to even comprehend because I was obviously not alive then either. But like, what you see with the Swifties and people doing like the obsessing over Taylor Swift shows, they did that. When the Beatles came, when the Beatles came to America, it was just that intense, and from all that I could tell, and I think that those bands, like they earned their stripes in a lot of ways. They had record labels doing things, but their performances were fantastic, and they were alone. There was not a lot back in the '60s and the early times of rock and roll that was being consumed on a large level. There and it's not like now where anybody can find things on the internet, and I think that timelessness of a song, and you can hear it, you can tell like a song. You hear something like the Beatles, you hear Yesterday, and
right, you're like,
yeah,
it's super enjoyable.
Right. I mean, like even like they kind of.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who despises the Beatles.
Right, and some people might say they're overrated or blah blah blah, but you know what?
Like,
but even then, like
music.
Yeah, there's still like iconic songs that you would absolutely sing along to if you heard it. And I think that's that movie that was out a few years ago, Yesterday, right? The premise is that the Beatles didn't exist, and this guy had an accident. He's the only one that remembers the Beatles songs, and so he's just like casually performing Yesterday in front of his friends, and their mind is blown.
And everyone thinks.
And it wasn't even that great of a performance, but it was like just him on the guitar, and it's just like that's a song, right? And I think those type of songs exist, and I think classic rock has that, and it's like, okay, this was like the you look at like maybe the top 10, 20, 30 rock and roll songs of like 1965, they're always going to be great.
Yeah.
And then you add that 1966, 67, all the way up to like the 80s and 90s, and now that's all playing on the same radio station, and that's classic rock.
So, what is your opinion on the classical rock bands and how they influence music today?
Yeah, I think really just the band itself is probably the biggest lasting influence of what these kind of classic rock bands. And I'm thinking again along the vein of the Beatles, of Led Zeppelin, of the Rolling Stones, that era where you had a four-piece band, right? I mean, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, they were all four-piece bands, and they had other people come and go, right, that performed with them. But you have your guitarist. In many cases, you might have two guitarists, like the Beatles did. You have your bassist and you have your drummer, and then you choose somebody with vocals. The Beatles are a little bit of an anomaly because McCartney and Lennon probably were 50-50 or less on vocals, and even Ringo sang on some songs, and George Harrison sang on even more than Ringo, and they all had their own unique take on how they performed. But the Rolling Stones, they had one frontman, that was Mick Jagger, right? Led Zeppelin had Robert Plant. Mick Jagger did not get behind a guitar very often, if ever, and Robert Plant the same way. They were the charismatic lead singer that performed almost like an icon on the stage, and that lasting influence of like that charismatic lead singer of a band, right? It's not Mick Jagger as a solo musician with his guys behind him. It's the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger as the iconic lead singer. It's not Robert Plant solo stuff. It's Led Zeppelin with Robert Plant as the charismatic lead singer doing his antics and things, and the same with the Who with Roger Daltrey and other bands from that generation of like the 60s and 70s. And then so I think that lasting influence is really felt in these bands that come out even today, right? That even guys like me in high school in the 90s and other kids like today, it's like, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to play in a garage or a basement, and there's going to be a guy on a bass, a guy on a drum set, and a guy on a guitar, and we're just going to figure out stuff, and we're going to maybe sing a little bit, and that's a band. And that's kind of what the influence of classic rock was. It's not like, hey, I'm going to be Chuck Berry or Elvis and just be up there doing my own thing and performing. It's I'm going to be with these guys and we're going to come up with something, the three of us or the four of us. And I think that's the lasting influence of classic rock. It's just that concept of these guys getting together and doing something. The Lennons and the McCartneys that will write these songs, the Daltrys and the Townsends, the Jagger and the Richards, and you got Pink Floyd, the David Gilmour with the Roger Waters, like just those collaborations of very talented people in themselves, the Pages and the Plants that put things together organically as a group. Even if they had a more charismatic frontman, it was the group that made the music. For instance, is classic rock brought the band forefront, and I think that's where it comes into play now. Is that you see bands form, whether it's a punk rock band or maybe like they're a little bit more hard or metally, they still get their roots from bands like the Zeppelins and the Pink Floyds and the Beatles and stuff. So Rachel, now that you've been asking me a question, I'm going to ask you one. So what this is again music that most of it predates me.
Right.
So obviously, then a couple of generations removed from you. So what are your favorite bands like from that classic rock scene, and why?
Okay, so I already talked about that I love the Beatles so much. I just think they're really cute too. I think not really like as like attractiveness or looks, but I mean like they're just like these cute like little band of like these like I don't know.
Well, their personalities are a huge part of who they
Exactly.
were. I mean, they did all these little movies and stuff, and
That's
I don't know if there's stories like one of the songs that I used to play back in my little band experience in high school was Hard Day's Night. I don't know if you've heard the story behind that. So they were filming a movie. I think it was Help, or no, I don't know which one. It was probably before Help, but they would put together like Hard Day's Night was like a Ringoism. He said something, it's been a hard day's night, like when they were getting around, and they're like, oh, I should make a song out of that. And they did so they made the song. Lennon and McCartney, those guys were geniuses, like over the course of one night, and it became like a movie. One of these little, and they're just like these antics of these like guys doing their thing in London or wherever, and it was just a cool little cultural blip that happened. That a lot of the that influence like lasted all the way. I mean, I grew up watching like the Monkees on TV, and and then it went out to like other things like cartoons and stuff like that, of cartoons of people in bands, and they would have these sort of like things like Gem and the Misfits was a big one in the 80s that your mom probably watched when she was a little girl. But they had that sort of mindset where bands like can be fun in their lives, and,
Yeah.
and the Beatles started that. So yeah, saying they're cute, I mean, it's not
And
just like
I
attractive
I
cute, but
think
it's the personality, right? The draw
and
there.
I think they kind of really started like being like a groupie and being like
Oh yeah,
being like the started with the fangirl obsession, right? Because
yeah, I
it's
think
like pick
so.
your Beatle, right? Even still see that today.
Right,
I'm George Harrison.
and that's exactly it. I mean, like that's where there's debate, right?
Right.
I think the fangirls were probably even more devoted to Elvis at the time, right? But
Right.
then the Beatles, it was like, ooh, there's options. Like, the original
Right.
the original boy band, but they weren't dancing.
No, yeah.
They're brilliant musicians and songwriters. They weren't, rehearsing a dance recital to somebody else's song. So that was a little bit different than what the boy bands are now, but they were originally that.
Yeah, and not even them just being like this like little cute band, but uh, I just think they have so much variety of songs. I mean, it's usually like the same sound, but like the variety of what they talk about. And I always feel like I can bump a Beatles song and feel happier. I mean, there's only a couple that are like really like where you can get sad to them, but like, I mean, they're all pretty good songs. And like, even if they have sad lyrics, like I feel like I just always get in like a good mood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Well, even when they got, like later in their career when they were more into the hippie and the counterculture scene,
Mm-hmm.
the 70s hit hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that, that took the time. They became more experimental and a little more bizarre compared to their previous work. But you look at that and you listen to those songs, those are still amazing pop tracks. There's not a lot of weird stuff that the Beatles put out. There's not a lot of like unlistenable things. It's all just, you can pick up a Beatles song and just get into the mood really easily.
Yeah, and I feel like their sound is so unique to themselves. Cause like I literally haven't heard. I feel like I haven't heard anything like the Beatles. I don't know. I feel like it was just a really like foundational start, and everyone heard the Beatles and then like went their own direction, right? So it built off the Beatles, but nothing was like the Beatles. I don't know in my mind. Okay, um, this one is bordering classic rock, but Pink Floyd. I grew up with that one,
That's right.
so I love Pink Floyd. I was actually just listening to Stay on Skiing, but I think they're so fun, and I love their music. I've been to like Pink Floyd laser shows, and
That's
I
right.
I don't know. I just foundational for my childhood for sure, and I
Proud dad
remember,
moment for me right now.
yeah, I remember like getting. I was like, Dad, I've been listening to "Wish You Were Here" more, and like stuff like that, and I gotta like. I always love telling my dad that because then I feel like I'm making him proud, but it's usually like okay. Um, okay, so I had a huge Aerosmith era, but I never really that one crazy. Billy
I
Joel,
was never a big Aerosmith fan.
yeah,
I don't know why. I just
I had an
didn't resonate
era,
with me.
yeah. I love Billy Joel. I know he's like one of the solo work stuff, but I think he is such a lyrical genius in my mind.
He is, and he's one I've seen twice in concert. Yeah, I know, not to brag, but like twice in concert as a teenager, and he puts on an amazing show.
Yeah,
And Billy Joel is one of those musicians that has, more talent than I think he just made amazing stuff. And like, it's
I
not
know.
just piano stuff. You listen to a lot of the stuff. There's some amazing songs that feature lead guitar, and there's
Hmm.
some a cappella stuff. Like, it's just there's just so many cool things that they do.
And like seeing him now perform too, I just think he's adorable. Like he's like this like old man playing on the piano and singing his heart out. And I think it's amazing. I also think, especially like when you're a kid, you like when you're a teenager and multiple generations. I think Vienna just always speaks to
It's a
you
great song.
because I feel like it's always pretty comforting hearing that from when you're a teenager, being just like someone kind of singing to you. So like slow down, like take your time.
Yeah, I actually was just at work the other day, and I heard somebody's phone go off, and it was Vienna was the ringtone, and it was like
Awesome.
somebody like in their 20s. I was like,
And
pretty
yeah,
cool.
even then, like it's not even just for the younger generation, for the older generation, just a reminder to like to live in the moment and take things slow. I think that song is so beautiful. Okay, I also love Fleetwood Mac. Sorry, I'm looking at my list of artists because I was like trying to remember which ones are Fleetwood Mac. I just recently got really into Fleetwood Mac. I love them. I know they're not really my dad's
Yeah, I like Fleetwood Mac. I would they're not. I like them more like say Aerosmith per se, but
Yeah.
there's just a lot of stuff that Fleetwood Mac's put out that doesn't really resonate as much with me.
No, yeah.
Like Fleetwood Mac to me, and again, everybody's gonna watch this and judge me, but I'm gonna confess and be honest. They're one of those ones that's like absolutely the greatest hits artist for me. Like
Yeah.
I could pull out 20 tracks and be content with just that. I'm not gonna consume everything else.
No, I understand.
But they're
that
great.
too. I I really like. I also like watching their live performances. There's some that are like pretty.
And they were amazing musicians. And they were they're kind of an interesting story too. Like thinking about that, they had like British and American roots.
Yeah.
And
There
they
was some like
had
drama in between the group.
Stevie Nicks and the guitar. What was but they came on after the fact because Fleetwood Mac was existing because it was like Mick Fleetwood and who was the other guy? Macintosh something. I don't remember.
Mhm.
I haven't researched and prepped for this, so you're putting me on the cuff here. But the drummer and another musician, they had their thing, and then there's Christine Evans, who I think, or what was her last name? Christine something or another. She passed away not too long ago.
Yeah.
But the Stevie Nicks was a duo performer with the guitarist that was her partner at the time, and they came on to the band at the same time. So like the two of them joined the band a few years after they'd been performing, and they came on together. And then they broke up while they were with Fleetwood Mac, which is kind of crazy. So there's a lot of drama in that band.
A lot of songs even about him.
There is, in fact, I think there's probably a lot of
Silver Springs. I think it's all about.
Yeah, if reality TV was around during the heyday of Fleetwood Mac, it would have been quite the thing. Yeah. The internet sensations and stuff like that was probably pretty big.
Those are probably it. I mean, I think everyone loves Queen. I love Queen. I mean, they're not someone I usually like. Isn't my main playlist.
I don't love Queen, by the way.
You don't love Queen?
I like Queen, but I don't love Queen.
No, I'm sure like growing up in the era is kind of like there's a lot of people I'll probably be like.
Yeah.
But I mean, but everyone can sing along to a Queen song.
Absolutely.
And I remember listening to Bohemian Rhapsody. My dad would play Bohemian Rhapsody on our way to the Causey Reservoir, and every one of my siblings were cracking up at the Mamma Mia, Mamma Mia, Mamma Mia. Like we had such a laughter fit to that.
Yeah,
song.
and that was a song from like the 70s or early 80s. I'm not sure when, but then it got revitalized in the 90s when it was on the Wayne's World movie, which was a big cultural phenomenon in the mid 90s. Was the SNL spin-off movies, but the Wayne's World movie had like a scene in the car with that. So I've always associated that song as just a fun, everybody get in the mood or road trip song. But Queen is one of those bands, like it's an arena rock band. Like you hear a Queen song at a concert as like a warm up in between, like interlude. It kind of pumps you up. You hear it at a sporting event or something like that. It pumps you up.
It's kind of like a Neil Diamond.
But I as a whole, I'm not a huge Queen fan. I have a couple classic rock bands that I kind of look down on, and they're not there, but they're kind of borderline. But
I think like Freddie Mercury and
fantastic talent.
They all had such amazing
fantastic talent, and their place in rock and roll is cemented. In my opinion, matters little, but I still think they're great, and I have quite a few Queen albums, but they're just not. They're nowhere near to me like the other ones are, and there are some bands like Aerosmith I just never really got into.
Yeah.
Another one that's a little more on the harder rock side that I never liked was Def Leppard.
Yeah.
Never liked Def Leppard. Apologize to all the Def Leppard fans out there. And then there is one band that I have to admit is like the most overrated in my opinion of all time. But even then, I can admit to enjoying some of their songs when they come on at times and then moments. But that's Journey. I'm not a fan of Journey. I think they're the most overrated band of all time.
Yeah, I only hear one song.
I'm gonna get burned in the comments for that, but but everybody knows Journey songs and everybody sings along to "Don't Stop Believing," just like yeah. So they're one of those bands that they kind of classic rock. That I'm just like, but very talented still. This doesn't do it for me.
Honestly, I also think there's a thing about like coming after the music has been created, where you have a little bit more room to like judge and pick, right? Because like I feel like when you're growing in the generation, you feel like, like grunge really hit you more than like...
Yeah, for sure.
Like classic rock, because you came after, and, all your uncles and all your, like, aunts are listening to classic rock, and you're like, you have more room to kind of choose what you like.
Absolutely. But, like, there's some songs that just absolutely do it for me, and I could spend hours on that, but just thinking of a few off the top of my head. One one of the songs that like absolutely does it for me and is Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. And it's not just the vocals, but like the duet of Roger Waters and David Gilmour, but it's the guitar. That guitar solo of Comfortably Numb. Anybody that's a real rock
Pink
and roll
Floyd.
fan, even if you think not a big Pink Floyd fan, just hearing those notes on David Gilmour's guitar just sings to your soul.
No,
And it absolutely does that, and it always will for me. That's one of those songs that just
they do guitar work insane. Like this one's pretty like popular right now, but Great Gig in the Sky. That one, that like it's makes it mostly
the whole Dark Side of the Moon album is just a fantastic album.
mostly inner instrumentals, but it's like I put a pair of headphones on and I just like feel like I'm transcending. Like it's beautiful.
Yeah, and actually, Led Zeppelin's another band that I absolutely love. I think,
I get that one.
pound for pound, the 4-piece band of Led Zeppelin probably features the most musically impressive people at their instruments at that time. Everybody that makes a list of top 10 guitarists of all time will always have Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin on there.
Mhm.
Probably narrow it down to like top 3 drummers of all time. Is always going to have John Bonham from Led Zeppelin on there, and even bassist John Paul Jones, who is a little bit underrated compared to the others, was a fantastic bassist and also did a lot of backup vocals. And then Robert Plant had a voice that just he could do the screaming high falsettos like the Immigrant Song, right? And then he could do the slower, kind of more deep bluesy stuff, and then he could do more like the more emotional, romantic-y type of songs. And he still does a lot of blues and things. He does a lot of collaborations and folk things, and he's just a fantastic vocalist. I think, but pound for pound, Led Zeppelin is probably the best musically performing band I think out there, and they resonated together really, really well in that era. They were kind of the pioneers of hard rock, in my opinion, because they took like what the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were doing and just added a little bit more to it. But they were a phenomenal band.
Yeah, I agree, and also like I specifically remember Led Zeppelin from Thor Ragnarok. I don't know if you guys remember that scene with the immigrant
It's
song.
yeah. That's actually probably
like, perfect.
One of the best uses of rock and roll music
in a movie. So
not only just the song and the timing of it and the scene, but if you look at that lyrics, I don't know if you're familiar with the lyrics.
Wait, no.
You're doing Paradise City by Guns N' Roses, but Come from the Land of the Ice and Snow. The songs are actually, I think it was written after a trip to Iceland by Led Zeppelin, but it's all Norse mythology. It's mentioning Valhalla. It's mentioning like all of the stuff that's the mythos of Thor.
Yeah.
In the Marvel, cinematic universe is really Norse mythology. That whole song is all Norse mythology, and it's all, just so you couple that with the scene of Thor and actually in, I think it was it Asgard, on the bridge.
Yeah.
Was it Asgard that was being destroyed at the time? Spoiler alert. But there was a big.
It was on the Rainbow Bridge.
Yeah, so it was in Asgard, right? So it was literally like in the land of Norse mythology right there. Yeah, so what a cool thing. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of Led Zeppelin. And also my childhood, my whole childhood.
I think, your oldest sister was born. One of my friends gave us a onesie. It says like, my daddy makes me listen to Led Zeppelin, or I listen to Led Zeppelin with my daddy. And it was like a black onesie, and I think all 4 of you and your siblings, all wore that at stages in your life when you're like 3 months old. So
that's awesome.
And you did listen to Led Zeppelin with your daddy at 3 months old.
I'm sure. And not to mention we had those little. There we go. I got them for Easter. MP3 players. Yes, and right. I remember I only had like a couple songs downloaded, and there was like one like it was Kashmir and like probably Immigrant Songs.
Yeah, I bought you guys all MP3 players when you're like 6 years old and like loaded up with tracks you could listen to on your own.
I think mine was pink. It had like little pink accents to it, and like Amy's was blue. I don't know. Nathan's was red. I remember that. That was like the best time ever. That's
my legacy, and look what it turned out to. So
I know, and I think we ended up saving up our money to buy like a cooler MP3 player. Yep. When we were like 10 or 8. Anyway, guys, we're gonna wrap things up. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we hope you learned a little bit classic rock today. And please mention your favorite classic rock songs down below. Yeah. See you guys later.